As he walked past the seamstress, the millionaire saw the necklace he had given to his daughter who disappeared 25 years ago and fell to his knees. Boston shimmered under a perfect June sky, the kind of day when tragedy seemed impossible. Charles Langford adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of a champagne glass, scanning the charity gala's crowded garden for his daughter. At 42, he commanded both respect and envy, a textile empire that clothed half of New England's elite, a magnificent home in Beacon Hill, and most precious of all, his 3-year-old daughter Emma, whose laughter could dissolve even his most stubborn business worries. "Have you seen Emma?" he asked Victoria, his wife of 18 months, who was deep in conversation with the mayor's wife. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "She was with the nanny by the fountain, darling. You know how she loves the water." Charles nodded, making his way through Boston's wealthiest citizens, all gathered at the Langford estate for the annual Children's Hospital benefit. He'd married Victoria after 2 years of painful widowhood following Diana's death in childbirth. The gossip columns called it a perfect match. Victoria brought youth and social connections, while Charles offered security and status. What the papers missed was how little warmth existed between his new wife and his daughter. The fountain stood empty except for a cluster of children tossing pennies into the water. No sign of Emma or her nanny. Charles felt the first flutter of unease. "Mr. Andrews," he called to his head of security. "Have you seen Emma?" "Not recently, sir. Would you like me to check with the staff?" Charles nodded, still maintaining his composure. Children wandered at parties. Emma was curious and fearless, traits that simultaneously filled him with pride and terror. 20 minutes later, his calm facade cracked. Security guards and staff combed the 12-acre estate. Victoria organized the society women into search parties while maintaining impeccable composure. "She's wearing a blue dress with white flowers," Charles told them, his voice steady despite the growing panic. "And her pink pearl necklace, the one I gave her for her birthday last month, it has an inscription, 'To my little star,' on the clasp." As afternoon slipped into evening, police arrived. Guests departed in hushed whispers. By midnight, when the last garden path had been searched for the 5th time, Charles stood alone by the fountain, Emma's tiny embroidered slipper clutched in his hand. It had been found near the estate's east gate, the one leading to the road. Her other shoe, her necklace, and Emma herself had vanished without a trace. "We'll find her," Victoria said, resting a hand on his shoulder. Children wander off all the time. But Charles knew better. The cold precision of the moment, the single abandoned slipper, the unlatched gate, spoke of calculation, not childish misadventure. The first 48 hours passed in a blur of police interviews, press conferences, and private investigators. Charles offered a reward that made even the wealthiest of his associates raise their eyebrows. Emma's face appeared on every newspaper front page in Massachusetts. On the 3rd night, alone in his study, Charles stared at the slipper, turning it over in his hands. Diana had embroidered tiny roses along its edges before Emma was born. Now it was all he had left. "The police called," Victoria said from the doorway, her silk robe immaculate despite the hour. "Nothing new. They're expanding the search to Rhode Island." Charles nodded mutely. He hadn't slept since Emma disappeared. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw her reaching for him, calling for her daddy. "You should rest," Victoria added. "You won't help her by destroying yourself." "I should have been watching her," he whispered. "Not networking, not discussing donations. She was my responsibility." Victoria's face softened. "This isn't your fault, Charles. You're a wonderful father." But the words rang hollow. A wonderful father wouldn't be sitting here with nothing but a tiny slipper. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Charles transformed his textile company's resources into a search operation. He hired ex-FBI agents and former intelligence officers. He appeared on national television, begging for information. Private planes dropped flyers across 6 states. Nothing. The investigation revealed frustratingly little. The nanny remembered a well-dressed woman asking about Emma, describing herself as a distant relative. Security footage showed nothing unusual. Several guests recalled seeing a service van leave shortly after 3 p.m., but none caught the license plate. Victoria tried to maintain normalcy, but Charles saw their marriage crumbling alongside his sanity. Their once elegant home became a command center of maps, phone lines, and missing person bulletins. when Victoria suggested removing Emma's toys from the living room after 6 months. Charles exploded in rage for the first time in his life. "She's coming home," he shouted, slamming his fist into the wall. "Don't you dare act like she's not." Victoria retreated, eyes wide with an emotion Charles couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Guilt? Concern? He was losing the ability to read human expressions. So consumed by his obsession to find Emma, by the 1-year mark, the police had formally classified the case as cold. The press moved on to newer tragedies. Friends stopped asking for updates. Victoria spent more time with her brother Robert, a corporate attorney whose attempts to console Charles always felt oddly rehearsed. Charles added private investigators to his payroll permanently. He expanded his search nationwide, following leads as far as California and Florida. He visited psychics. Against all rational judgment, he kept Emma's room exactly as she had left it, with seasonal adjustments, new summer clothes, winter coats, birthday presents that would never be opened. On restless nights, he would sit in her room, sometimes falling asleep clutching the tiny slipper and a photograph of Emma, wearing her pearl necklace. In the picture, she beamed up at him, the pearls shimmering with a delicate pink luster against her skin. He'd chosen pink pearls because Diana had loved them, said they represented hope and new beginnings. Now they represented everything he had lost. As years passed, Charles aged decades. His hair grayed completely by 50. His business thrived through sheer momentum and capable executives, but his personal life lay in ruins. Victoria finally left after 7 years, citing his obsession with finding Emma. Charles barely noticed her departure. With each passing year, hope dimmed, but never died completely. Sometimes he would see a girl of the right age with similar blonde curls, and his heart would stop until she turned. Revealing a stranger's face, he kept aging Emma in his mind, 4, 5, 10, 15, wondering what she would look like, who she would become. After 25 years, the search had become as much a part of him as his heartbeat. He maintained a nationwide network of private investigators. He still distributed updated age progression photos on the anniversary of her disappearance. He had investigated 1,387 leads, each one raising his hopes before dashing them cruelly. But Charles Langford refused to stop looking for his little star. As long as he drew breath, he would search for the daughter who had vanished with nothing but a lost slipper left behind. 25 years could change a city, but poverty maintained a stubborn foothold in certain Newark neighborhoods. Charles observed this from the backseat of his town car as it navigated streets where abandoned factories had been converted into hip workspaces and community centers. His driver slowed near a renovated warehouse that now housed the New Beginnings Community Center, where Charles was scheduled to deliver a donation, a routine appearance that his PR team had arranged. "We're early, Mr. Langford," his driver announced. "About 20 minutes." Charles nodded absently. At 67, his once commanding presence had softened. His hair was silver now, his face lined with grief that never fully healed. He dressed impeccably still, a lifetime habit from running Langford textiles. But the boardroom fire had dimmed in his eyes. "I'll walk for a bit," he decided. "Meet me at the center at 4. The autumn air felt crisp against his face as he strolled down the block. He'd found that movement helped clear his mind on bad days. And today was a bad day. Emma's birthday. She would be 28 now. Each year, he marked the day with a private ritual, a cupcake with a candle, a new age progression photo commissioned from specialists, and a donation to missing children's organizations. Charles paused at a storefront with a simple sign. Stitches and Stories, custom tailoring. The window displayed handcrafted clothing that caught his professional eye. The stitching was exceptional. A bell jingled softly as he pushed the door open, curious about the craftsmanship. The shop was small but immaculate. Bolts of fabric lined the walls in careful arrangements of color and texture. A radio played soft jazz near an old Singer sewing machine. Behind the counter, a young woman bent over her work, pins held between her lips as she marked alterations on a wedding dress. "I'll be right with you," she said without looking up, her voice muffled by the pins. Charles nodded, content to browse. Textile was his language, the one constant through decades of searching and heartbreak. He could identify quality with a touch, and these materials were surprisingly premium for such a modest shop. "Sorry about that," the woman said, finally securing the last pin. "Wedding season never really ends anymore." How can I? She stopped mid-sentence as she looked up at him, not in recognition. They'd never met, but with the startled expression people often had when facing Charles Langford. His wealth was substantial enough to make him recognizable, his tragedy public enough to make people uncomfortable. "I was admiring your work," he said, gesturing to a display of handcrafted scarves. "You have exceptional technique." The woman smiled, revealing dimples that transformed her serious face. "Thank you. I learned from the best. My mother, she could make magic with a needle and thread." As she moved around the counter, Charles estimated she was in her late 20s. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a loose blouse, but they were clearly her own creations, with subtle embroidery at the cuffs. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, stray wisps framing a face that struck him as both beautiful and familiar in a way he couldn't place. "I'm Abigail," she said, extending her hand. "Abigail Foster." "Charles Langford," he replied, shaking her hand. Something shifted in her expression, the usual recognition of his name, but she handled it gracefully. "The textile magnate. No wonder you noticed the quality of my fabrics." Charles chuckled. "Old habits. I started as a quality inspector before I took over the family business." She nodded, moving to straighten a display. "My mother spoke highly of Langford fabrics, said they were worth the extra cost because they lasted." As she reached up to adjust a bolt of fabric, something caught the light around her neck. Charles froze mid-sentence, his heart seizing in his chest. A necklace of pink pearls gleamed against her skin. Not just any pink pearls. These had the distinctive rose-petal hue that Charles had specially commissioned 28 years ago, a hue created by a specific process from a particular oyster farm in Japan that had since closed. The room tilted. Charles steadied himself against a table, unable to tear his gaze from the necklace. "Sir," Abigail's voice sounded distant. "Are you all right?" With trembling fingers, he pointed to her necklace. May I see that?" Confusion crossed her face, but she lifted the strand slightly. It was my mother's. Well, she said it was always meant to be mine." Charles stepped closer, his legs barely supporting him. There, on the small golden clasp, he could just make out the inscription that had haunted his dreams for 25 years. "To my little star." His knees gave out. The floor rushed up to meet him as darkness edged his vision. The last thing he heard was Abigail's alarmed voice calling for help. "Sir, Mr. Langford, can you hear me?" Charles blinked, disoriented. He was seated in a chair, a glass of water in his hand. Abigail knelt beside him, concern etched across her features. "I'm sorry," he managed, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to frighten you. Should I call someone, a doctor?" Charles shook his head, struggling to compose himself. "No, I'm fine. It's just..." His eyes drifted back to her necklace. "That necklace. Where did you get it?" Abigail's hand reflexively touched the pearls. "Like I said, it was my mother's. She gave it to me when I turned 18. Said it was the one valuable thing she owned." A shadow crossed her face. "She passed away 3 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Charles said automatically, his mind racing. "Your mother, what was her name?" "Martha Foster," Abigail replied, her wariness growing. "Mr. Langford, why are you asking about my necklace?" How could he explain that he was looking at a ghost? That the necklace around her neck had disappeared with his daughter 25 years ago? That the inscription had been written specifically for Emma? I knew someone who had a similar necklace once," he said carefully. "It's quite distinctive." Abigail nodded slowly, unconvinced. "My mother never really explained where it came from. Just that it was part of my history." She hesitated. "Actually, she didn't know my full history herself. I was adopted, informally. She found me when I was very young." Charles's pulse thundered in his ears. "Found you? Near Richmond, Virginia? She was driving back from visiting family and found me alone by the roadside." Abigail smiled sadly. "She always said I was a gift sent from God. Never had children of her own." Charles gripped the armrests of his chair, steadying himself against hope so crushing it felt like drowning. "How old were you when she found you?" "Around 3, they thought. I don't remember anything before Martha." Abigail's expression shifted from concern to suspicion. "Mr. Langford, why are you so interested in my past?" Before Charles could formulate a response, the shop door jingled, A young man entered, carrying a paper bag that smelled of fresh bread. "Hey, Abby, I brought lunch." He stopped, noticing Charles. "Oh, sorry. Didn't realize you had a customer." "Owen," Abigail said, visibly relieved at the interruption. "This is Mr. Langford. He was just leaving." Charles stood shakily, knowing he couldn't press further without scaring her away. 25 years of searching had taught him patience. "Yes, I have an appointment. Thank you for the water, Miss Foster." He handed her his business card. "If you ever want to talk more about textiles, or anything else, please call me anytime." Outside, Charles sank into his waiting car, trembling. He reached for his phone with unsteady fingers. "Jenkins," he said, when his head of security answered. "I need your team in Newark now, and get me everything you can on an Abigail Foster, for the first time in 25 years. Charles felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Hope. Charles barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pink pearls against Abigail's neck, the inscription that only his daughter's necklace could bear. By dawn, he was in his home office, surrounded by Emma's case files, 25 years of dead ends and false hopes. "Sir, the team has arrived," announced Jenkins from the doorway, a former FBI agent who'd worked Emma's case originally. Jenkins had become Charles's head of security and lead investigator 15 years ago. Charles nodded as 3 people entered: a digital forensic specialist, a background investigator, and a DNA expert. His permanent search team, funded from Charles's personal fortune. "I need everything on Abigail Foster," Charles said, sliding across the business card with her shop's address. "Background, adoption records, medical history, and I need surveillance on the shop. Discreet, respectful, but thorough." Jenkins nodded, accustomed to Charles's intensity. "Sir, I have to ask, what makes this different from the other leads?" Charles opened his desk drawer and removed a small velvet box. Inside was the original jeweler's sketch of Emma's necklace, alongside detailed specifications for the rare pink pearls. "She's wearing this exact necklace, not similar, identical." Charles's voice trembled. The pearls, the clasp, the inscription, they were custom-made from a Japanese pearl farm that closed 20 years ago. Jenkins studied the sketch. "And her age matches. She appears to be in her late 20s. She mentioned being found near Richmond at approximately age 3. The timeline fits." Charles paced the room. "But I need proof, not coincidences. I need DNA." "That's delicate territory, sir," warned the DNA expert. "We can't legally obtain her DNA without consent." Charles stopped pacing. "Then we get close enough to gather indirect samples. A coffee cup, a hair, anything. I just need to know." The team exchanged glances. They'd seen Charles's hopes rise and fall too many times. "I'll handle the surveillance myself," Jenkins decided. "Ms. Blake will run background, Dr. Patel will prepare for DNA analysis. We move carefully. If this Abigail Foster is Emma Langford, we don't want to scare her off." Charles nodded gratefully. "And I need to find out about the mother. Martha Foster. Who was she? How did she come to find a 3-year-old by the roadside and never report it?" Jenkins frowned. "Most people would have contacted authorities." "Exactly." Charles stared at a faded photograph of Emma wearing the pearl necklace. "Which means either Martha Foster was hiding something, or someone told her a story that made her believe keeping quiet was the right thing to do." 3 days later, Charles returned to Stitches and Stories with a fabric sample in hand, his pretext for seeing Abigail again. The shop bell jingled cheerfully, but the counter stood empty. "Be right out," called Abigail's voice from the back room. Charles took a steadying breath. Jenkins's preliminary report had yielded limited information. Martha Foster had been a widowed seamstress who lived modestly, paid her taxes, attended church regularly, and raised Abigail in a small apartment above what was now the shop. No adoption records existed in any state database. Martha had died of cancer 3 months ago, leaving Abigail the building and small savings. Abigail emerged carrying a bolt of blue silk. She faltered briefly upon seeing Charles. "Mr. Langford, I didn't expect to see you again." Charles offered his most disarming smile. "I have a somewhat unusual request. We're developing a new fabric line at Langford Textiles, and I was impressed by your craftsmanship. Would you consider testing this sample? Your feedback would be valuable." Suspicion flickered across her face, but professional curiosity won out. She accepted the fabric swatch, running it expertly between her fingers. Japanese mulberry silk with a cotton blend, she identified immediately. Interesting weave pattern. Charles nodded, impressed despite himself. You have an excellent eye. My mother taught me to identify fabrics blindfolded by the time I was 12. A small smile softened her features. She said knowing your materials was as important as knowing your stitches. Every mention of Martha Foster sent conflicting emotions through Charles. Gratitude that Emma, if this was Emma, had been raised with care, and resentment that this woman had kept his daughter from him. He had to tread carefully. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. Abigail nodded, her guard lowering slightly. She was. Raised me alone after finding me. Never much money, but we managed. Finding you must have been quite a shock for her, Charles ventured. Abigail studied the fabric, avoiding his eyes. She didn't talk about it much. Said she was driving back from visiting her sister near Richmond and saw me near the road. Thought I was lost, but couldn't find any parents nearby. She shrugged. Back then, things were different. She just kept me. Without reporting to authorities, Charles asked, careful to keep his tone curious rather than accusatory. Abigail's expression hardened. She said she tried, but no one seemed interested in a poor woman with a found child. Eventually, she just created a life for us. She set down the fabric. Mr. Langford, I get the feeling you're not here about textiles. Charles hesitated. Jenkins had warned against revealing too much too soon. But Abigail's directness deserved honesty. You're right. I'm interested in your story because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because 25 years ago, my 3-year-old daughter disappeared during a charity event in Boston. The only thing found was one of her slippers near a gate. Abigail's eyes widened. And you think I'm... She shook her head. That's impossible. My mother would never... The necklace, Abigail, Charles said gently. That exact necklace was custom made for my daughter's 3rd birthday. To my little star, was our special phrase. She was wearing it when she disappeared. Abigail's hand flew to the pearls, her face paling. This doesn't make sense. My mother was the kindest person I knew. She couldn't have. I don't believe she took you, Charles clarified quickly. But she may have received you from someone who did. The shop door opened, jingling brightly in the tense silence. The young man from before, Owen, entered, stopping when he sensed the atmosphere. Everything okay, Abby? Abigail forced a smile. Fine, Mr. Langford was just leaving. Charles recognized dismissal. He handed her a business card, different from the company one he'd given before. This has my personal number, if you want to talk or have questions about anything I've said. Please call. As he turned to leave, Abigail's voice stopped him. What was her name? Your daughter. Emma, Charles replied, the name catching in his throat. Emma Diana Langford. Outside, Charles exhaled shakily, leaning against his car. Jenkins appeared from his surveillance position across the street. How did it go? She didn't throw me out immediately, Charles said. I told her about Emma and the necklace. She's skeptical, but the seed is planted. Jenkins nodded. We've secured several potential DNA samples from discarded coffee cups. Dr. Patel is processing them now. We should have preliminary results in 48 hours. Charles watched as Owen embraced Abigail through the shop window. Her body language revealed distress. She was telling him about their conversation. I've waited 25 years, Charles said quietly. I can wait 2 more days. But as he slid into his car, a new fear gripped him. What if Abigail was Emma, but wanted nothing to do with him? What if learning the truth destroyed the life she'd built? For the first time, Charles confronted the possibility that finding Emma might not lead to the reunion he'd imagined for 25 years. The next 48 hours stretched before him like an eternity. Sunlight filtered through classroom windows as Owen Bradley finished writing mathematical equations on the whiteboard. At 29, he'd already established himself as one of Newark Community College's most popular professors. Students responded to his genuine enthusiasm for mathematics and his ability to make complex concepts accessible. Remember, he told his departing students, the midterm covers everything through Chapter 7. Office hours tomorrow if you need help. After the last student left, Owen gathered his materials, mind already shifting to Abigail. Yesterday, she'd seemed shaken after her second encounter with Charles Langford. The textile magnate's claim had sounded outlandish, that Abigail might be his long-lost daughter, yet something about it had clearly unsettled her. The pink pearl necklace. Owen had never questioned its origins, just as he'd never questioned Abigail's unconventional upbringing. Martha Foster had been kind to him, accepting him into their small family circle without hesitation. The idea that Martha might have been involved, even unknowingly, in something sinister seemed impossible. Owen's phone buzzed with a text from Abigail. "Can you pick up prenatal vitamins on your way over? Feeling queasy today?" The reminder of Abigail's 8-week pregnancy sent a wave of protective instinct through Owen. They hadn't planned this child, but from the moment she'd shown him the positive test, he'd been certain about wanting this future with her. He quickly texted back his agreement, adding a heart emoji. Their timing wasn't ideal. Abigail still mourning Martha, the shop barely breaking even. But Owen had witnessed enough death in his own family to know life didn't wait for perfect circumstances. His grandfather's recent passing after a long illness had reinforced that lesson. Across town, Charles paced his hotel suite, waiting for Jenkins to arrive with the DNA results. The past 2 days had been excruciating. He'd forced himself to attend scheduled business meetings rather than camp outside Abigail's shop. Fighting the urge to demand answers from the universe after 25 years of silence, a knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Jenkins entered, accompanied by Dr. Patel, whose grave expression sent Charles's heart plummeting. "Just tell me," Charles demanded. Dr. Patel opened a folder. "We ran the comparison twice to be certain. The DNA from the samples collected matches the genetic profile we have on file for Emma Langford with 99,99997% certainty. Abigail Foster is your daughter." Charles sank into a chair, overwhelmed. For 25 years, he'd lived with a gaping wound where Emma had been torn away. Now, confirmation of what he'd suspected since seeing the necklace left him speechless. His daughter was alive. She had grown into a skilled, independent young woman. She had no memory of him. "There's more," Jenkins said quietly. "While investigating Martha Foster's background, we found something concerning." 3 weeks before Abigail was found, Martha visited her sister in Richmond. As she claimed, however, phone records show multiple calls between Martha and a burner phone during that period. The burner phone was purchased with cash in Boston the day after Emma disappeared. Charles stared at him. "Are you saying Martha was involved in the kidnapping?" Jenkins shook his head. "We don't think she planned it, but she may have been approached by someone who did. A childless widow suddenly acquires a toddler with no documentation. She had to know something wasn't right. We should take this to the authorities," Dr. Patel suggested. "Not yet," Charles said firmly. "I need to approach Abigail first. She's just lost the only mother she remembers. I won't have her learn the truth from police or newspapers." Jenkins frowned. "Sir, there's a criminal investigation aspect here. Whoever orchestrated Emma's kidnapping is still out there, and they've had 25 years to cover their tracks," Charles countered. "A few more days won't change that. I need to do this right for Abigail's sake." After Jenkins and Dr. Patel departed, Charles sat alone, staring at a photo of 3-year-old Emma beside the DNA results, confirming she had grown into Abigail Foster. The miracle he'd prayed for had happened, but the path forward remained uncertain. "Mr. Langford called again," Owen said as he handed Abigail her prenatal vitamins. "Left a message asking to meet." Abigail continued organizing fabric swatches, her movements tense. "I don't know what to think, Owen. He seems so certain, but it's just impossible." Owen leaned against the counter. "Is it, you've always said Martha was vague about how she found you?" "Finding an abandoned child is different from kidnapping," Abigail snapped, immediately regretting her tone. "I'm sorry, this whole situation has me on edge." "I understand." Owen gently took her hand. "But maybe getting answers would help. If he's wrong, you tell him once and for all. If there's truth to it, don't you want to know?" Abigail touched the pink pearls at her throat, a habit when she was anxious. "What if it changes everything? Who am I if I'm not Martha Foster's daughter? If I'm some rich man's stolen child?" "You're Abigail," Owen said firmly. "The woman who makes beautiful things with her hands, who laughs at terrible puns, who cried at that documentary about sea turtles." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Who's carrying our child. Nothing changes who you are now." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. "I'm scared, Owen. I know. But I'm right here with you. Whatever you decide." After Owen left for his evening class, Abigail retrieved Charles's business card. Her thumb hovered over the number. What right did this stranger have to upend her life? Yet the necklace nagged at her. Martha had always been evasive about its origins, saying only that it was Abigail's birthright. With trembling fingers, she dialed. "Mr. Langford, this is Abigail Foster. I think we should talk." Charles ended the call with Abigail, hope and anxiety warring in his chest. She'd agreed to meet tomorrow morning at a neutral location, a cafe near her shop. As he was processing this development, his phone rang again. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. His ex-wife rarely contacted him. Their divorce 15 years ago had been amicable on paper, acrimonious in reality. Victoria had claimed Charles's obsession with finding Emma had destroyed their marriage. Charles suspected Victoria had simply tired of competing with a ghost. "Victoria," he answered cautiously. "Charles." Her voice remained elegant even at 62. "I heard you've been missing board meetings. The rumor is you're chasing another lead about Emma. After all these years, really." Charles tensed. He'd told no one about Abigail except his investigative team. "How did you hear about this? Boston is small, and you're not exactly inconspicuous when you're on one of your missions," Victoria replied. "I'm concerned about you, Charles, and about the company. The board is getting restless with your absences." "The company is fine," he said dismissively. "Is that all?" A pause. "Robert mentioned you've hired additional investigators. He still has contacts at your security firm, you know." Charles frowned. Why would Victoria's brother be tracking his activities? Robert had served as Langford Textile's legal counsel for years, but they'd parted ways after the divorce. "My personal matters are none of Robert's concern," Charles said coldly. "Or yours. Don't be like that, Charles. Despite everything, I've always cared about your well-being. These false hopes aren't healthy." Charles ended the call, unsettled. Victoria's sudden interest struck him as odd, particularly her knowledge of his new investigators. A thought occurred to him, one that had surfaced periodically over the years, but always seemed too outlandish to pursue. What if Victoria knew more about Emma's disappearance than she'd revealed? He dismissed the idea again. Victoria had been cold. Perhaps, but not a monster. She had helped organize the search parties, contacted authorities, supported him through the initial nightmare. Still, Charles made a mental note to have Jenkins look deeper into Victoria's activities around the time of the kidnapping. Every stone needed turning now that Abigail, Emma, was within reach. Tomorrow's meeting loomed large in his mind. One chance to begin rebuilding a relationship shattered 25 years ago. One chance to reclaim his daughter. The cafe Abigail had chosen was a small, shabby chic establishment that served fair trade coffee and locally baked pastries. Charles arrived 15 minutes early. Selecting a corner table that offered privacy without feeling isolated, he ordered black coffee but left it untouched, his stomach too knotted with anticipation to handle caffeine. At precisely 10 o'clock, Abigail entered. She'd dressed carefully. Charles recognized the subtle armor of her professional attire, a handcrafted blazer over a simple blouse. The pink pearl necklace gleamed against her skin. She spotted him immediately but stopped at the counter to order before approaching. "Thank you for meeting me," Charles said as she sat down. Abigail nodded, her expression guarded. "I have questions, many of them. I'll answer everything I can," Charles promised. He placed a manila folder on the table but didn't open it. "But first, I want you to know that I understand how unsettling this must be for you. I'm not here to disrupt your life or force anything upon you. Yet here we are," Abigail replied, a hint of Martha Foster's pragmatism in her tone. "You believe I'm your daughter who disappeared 25 years ago. That's inherently disruptive, Mr. Langford." Charles managed a sad smile. "Fair enough." The barista delivered Abigail's tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Tell me about the day I disappeared. Everything you remember." Charles had recounted that day hundreds of times to police, reporters, therapists, but never to the person who mattered most. He spoke quietly, describing the charity event, the last time he saw Emma playing near the fountain, the discovery of the single slipper. Abigail listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing. "You never stopped looking," she finally said. not a question. Never. I hired investigators, posted rewards, followed every lead across the country. I've spent more on finding Emma than on anything else in my life. Charles hesitated. When I saw your necklace, it was like seeing a ghost. Those pearls were unique, cultivated specifically for Emma from a Japanese pearl farm that closed 2 decades ago. Abigail's fingers unconsciously touched the pearls. My mother said it was my birthright. That's all she would tell me. Charles slid the folder toward her. I had DNA tests run. I know that sounds intrusive, but I had to be certain. DNA tests. How did you... Abigail's eyes widened with realization. The coffee cups. Your visits weren't coincidental. I'm sorry for the deception, Charles said sincerely. But after 25 years of false leads and heartbreak, I needed certainty before approaching you with this. Abigail stared at the closed folder, not reaching for it. And what do they say, these tests? They confirm with 99.99997% certainty that you are Emma Langford. Charles's voice caught. My daughter. The cafe continued its morning bustle around them, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring at their corner table. Abigail sat perfectly still, only her quickened breathing betraying her inner turmoil. This doesn't make sense, she finally said. My mother, Martha, was the most honest person I knew. She would never participate in a kidnapping. I don't believe she orchestrated it, Charles clarified. But our investigation found connections suggesting she may have received you from someone else. Phone records show calls between Martha and a burner phone purchased in Boston the day after Emma disappeared. Abigail pushed back her chair abruptly. This is too much. You're telling me my entire life has been a lie. That the woman who raised me, who loved me, was complicit in a crime. I believe Martha loved you, Charles said gently. Perhaps she convinced herself that keeping you was the right thing to do. People can justify almost anything when emotions are involved. And what do you want from me now? Abigail demanded, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. To come back to Boston, join the Langford dynasty, pretend the last 25 years never happened. I want whatever you're willing to give, Charles answered. Time, conversation, a chance to know you. Nothing more unless you want it. Abigail finally opened the folder. Inside were the DNA results. Photos of 3-year-old Emma wearing the pink pearl necklace and a birth certificate. She studied the photos, her hands shaking slightly. I don't remember any of this, she whispered. Not you, not Boston, not being Emma. She looked up at Charles, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. I've been Abigail Foster my entire life. And you still are, Charles assured her. Finding out where you came from doesn't erase who you've become. Abigail closed the folder. I need time to process this, and I'd like to have these analyzed independently. No offense, but I can't just take your word for something this momentous. Of course, I'll provide whatever you need for verification. As Abigail gathered her belongings to leave, Charles ventured one question. The young man who comes to your shop. Owen, is it? He seems important to you. A hint of softness touched Abigail's face. He's my partner. We've been together for 2 years. She hesitated, then added quietly, I'm pregnant, 8 weeks. The revelation struck Charles like a physical blow. Not just a daughter found, but a grandchild on the way. Congratulations, he managed. Abigail nodded, then rose to leave. At the door, she turned back. I can't promise anything, Mr. Langford, but I'll call you once I've verified everything. After she left, Charles remained seated, overwhelmed by their interaction. She had Emma's directness, her questioning mind, but there was a steadiness to Abigail that was entirely her own, or perhaps Martha Foster's influence. His phone buzzed with a text from Jenkins. Victoria, flying to Newark today. Unexpected trip booked this morning. Surveillance in place? Charles frowned. Victoria's sudden interest, followed by an unplanned trip, seemed far from coincidental. What did his ex-wife want in Newark? In her apartment above the shop. Abigail emptied the folder onto her kitchen table. DNA reports, photographs, newspaper clippings about Emma's disappearance. They formed a collage of a life she couldn't remember living. The doorbell rang. Owen had promised to come after his morning class. That was quick, she said, opening the door. But instead of Owen, Victoria Langford stood in the hallway. Abigail Foster. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm Victoria Langford, Charles's ex-wife. I believe we need to talk. Abigail hesitated, studying the elegant woman with her perfect blonde bob and designer suit. How did you find me? That's not important, Victoria replied smoothly. What matters is that Charles has convinced himself you're our long-lost Emma, and I'm concerned about where this delusion might lead. Our Emma, Abigail repeated, catching the possessive pronoun. I was her stepmother, but I loved her as my own. Victoria's performance was flawless, but something in her expression sent warning signals through Abigail. Charles has never accepted Emma's death. He spent decades convincing himself that every young woman with blonde hair might be her. He has DNA evidence, Abigail said cautiously. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. Charles has manipulated evidence before when he thought he'd found Emma. It nearly destroyed the young woman involved. I'm here to warn you. Protect yourself from his obsession. As Victoria spoke, Abigail noticed Owen approaching from the stairwell. He stopped short, seeing the visitor. Is everything okay, Abby? He asked, moving protectively to her side. Victoria's gaze shifted to Owen, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, surprise. It disappeared so quickly, Abigail couldn't be sure. Everything's fine, Abigail said. Mrs. Langford was just leaving. Victoria extended a business card. Think carefully about what I've said. Charles's obsession has hurt many people over the years. Don't let yourself become another casualty. After Victoria departed, Abigail explained the morning's events to Owen. He listened intently, examining the evidence Charles had provided. This looks legitimate, he said, reviewing the DNA results. But we should get independent verification. That's what I told him. Abigail sank onto the couch. What bothers me most is how quickly his ex-wife showed up. How did she even know about me? And why does she care after all these years? Owen sat beside her, taking her hand. What does your gut tell you? Abigail considered the question. That Charles Langford believes what he's saying, that my mother might have kept secrets I never suspected. She touched the pink pearl necklace, and that Victoria Langford is hiding something important. A week passed before Abigail contacted Charles again. 7 days of uncertainty for him. 7 days of independent verification for her. When her call finally came, Charles was in a board meeting at Langford Textile's Boston headquarters. Seeing her name on his phone, he abruptly excused himself, leaving bewildered executives staring after him. Abigail, he answered, heart pounding. The tests confirm it, she said without preamble. I had them done at Princeton Medical. They match your results. Her voice was steady but strained. I've been trying to process what this means. Charles leaned against the hallway wall, overwhelmed with relief. Thank you for telling me, for checking on your own terms. A pause. I'd like to meet again. There's more I need to understand. Of course I can come to Newark. No, Abigail interrupted. I want to see Boston, the place where I was born, your home. If I'm going to make sense of any of this, I need to see where Emma Langford came from. Charles closed his eyes briefly, fighting emotion. When would you like to come? This weekend Owen will be with me. I'll send a car or the company jet if you prefer. A soft, humorless laugh. Let's stick with the car for now. I'm not ready for private jets. After arranging the details, Charles returned to the boardroom, but his mind remained elsewhere. Abigail was coming to Boston, to the house where Emma had spent her first 3 years, the house she'd been taken from. Later that evening, Jenkins updated him on Victoria's activities in Newark. She spent 40 minutes with Abigail, then met with her brother Robert at a hotel bar. They seemed to be arguing. After that, she returned to Boston. Charles frowned. Did you get any audio? No, sir. But our operative observed Robert showing her papers that upset her considerably. Charles stared out at the Boston skyline from his penthouse window. I want everything on Robert's recent activities, financial records, phone calls, travel. If Victoria and Robert are concerned about Abigail, there's a reason. Sir, Jenkins hesitated. Have you considered the possibility that Victoria might have been involved in Emma's disappearance? The question hung in the air. Charles had avoided this suspicion for years. Finding it too horrible to contemplate, Victoria had been cold toward Emma. Yes, but kidnapping. Find me proof, Jenkins, one way or another. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp. Charles had barely slept. Alternating between nervous anticipation and preparation, he'd opened Emma's room, preserved but regularly cleaned, and refreshed the flowers in the crystal vase by her window. He'd reviewed photo albums and home videos, ready if Abigail wanted to see them. The secure car he'd sent texted its arrival. Charles stood in his foyer, watching through the window as Abigail emerged, Owen close behind her. She paused on the walkway, taking in the imposing brownstone mansion on Beacon Hill with its manicured gardens and historical architecture. Charles opened the door before they could knock. "Welcome," he said simply. Abigail nodded, her expression a careful mask. She wore the pink pearl necklace. Deliberately, Charles thought. "This is Owen Bradley," she introduced. The young man shook Charles's hand firmly, his protective stance toward Abigail evident. "Thank you both for coming," Charles said, leading them into the sunlit living room where refreshments waited. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." Abigail didn't sit, instead moving to examine family photographs arranged on the mantelpiece. "Is this her, my mother?" she asked, picking up a portrait of Diana. "Yes," Charles confirmed softly. "Diana, she died giving birth to you. To Emma, she had a congenital heart condition that pregnancy exacerbated." Abigail studied the photograph. A beautiful woman with the same blonde hair Abigail had inherited. "I've never seen anyone I'm related to by blood before," she said quietly. "It's strange. You have her eyes and her hands." Charles hesitated. "Would you like to see more? I have albums, videos from when you were little." Abigail finally sat, Owen beside her. "Yes, but first, I need to understand what happened. The investigation into my disappearance. The suspects. Everything." Charles nodded, retrieving a carefully organized binder of case files. For the next hour, he walked them through the investigation, the initial suspects, the dead ends, the lack of ransom demands that had puzzled authorities. The leading theory was a professional kidnapping, Charles explained. But without demands for money, it made little sense. Some investigators believed it might have been someone with a psychotic attachment to children who had been watching you. Abigail absorbed it all with remarkable composure. And Victoria, what was her role during this time? Charles hesitated. She organized search parties, spoke with police. She seemed appropriately distraught. He paused. "Our marriage didn't survive the aftermath. She said my obsession with finding you consumed everything else. She visited me in Newark," Abigail revealed. "Warned me about your delusions and obsession." Charles stiffened. "Jenkins mentioned she'd contacted you. What exactly did she say? That you'd convinced yourself I was Emma before, with other women, that you'd manipulated evidence." Abigail watched his reaction closely. "Was any of that true?" "No," Charles said firmly. "There were other leads over the years. Dozens of them. But I never falsified evidence, and I certainly never told another young woman she was Emma without absolute certainty." Owen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Why would Victoria try to discourage Abigail from connecting with you? What would she gain after all these years?" The question hung in the air. Charles had been asking himself the same thing since learning of Victoria's Newark visit. "I don't know," he admitted. "But Jenkins is investigating Victoria and her brother Robert's activities around the time of the kidnapping. We may have missed something 25 years ago." After more discussion, Charles offered to show them the rest of the house. Abigail agreed, following him through the elegant rooms of the mansion until they reached a closed door on the second floor. "This was your room," Charles said softly. "It's been preserved, though obviously the crib and toddler furniture were replaced as you, as Emma, would have grown. I always hoped," he trailed off, opening the door. The room beyond was beautiful, a teenage girl's room that had never been used, decorated in soft blues and creams. Bookshelves held the children's classics Emma had loved at 3, alongside more mature books she might have enjoyed as she grew. On the bedside table sat a small, worn teddy bear. "Mr. Buttons," Abigail whispered, reaching for the bear automatically. She froze, her hand outstretched. "How did I know that?" Charles stared at her, heart racing. "That's what you called him? You wouldn't sleep without him." Abigail picked up the bear with trembling hands, running her finger over a stitched patch on his arm. "He had surgery," she said faintly, "because I accidentally tore his arm while playing superhero." Charles finished. "You were jumping from the sofa. Diana sewed him up that night while you watched anxiously." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. I don't remember that. I shouldn't know his name. Owen moved to her side, steadying her. Memory is strange, Abby. Sometimes it stays with us in ways we don't recognize. Charles watched them, hope and caution warring within him. There's one more thing I'd like to show you. In my study, in the book-lined room downstairs, Charles unlocked a drawer and removed a small box. The investigators found this in the gardens a week after you disappeared. We believe it was dropped by whoever took you. He opened the box, revealing a small signet ring with an ornate R engraved on its face. Abigail examined it. Does this R stand for something? We never knew, Charles said. None of our acquaintances claimed it. Owen took the ring, studying it carefully. This reminds me of something. He frowned. My grandfather had a similar ring, but with a B for Bradley. It was a family heirloom. Charles and Abigail both stared at him. Your grandfather? Charles asked sharply. Owen nodded. He passed away 3 months ago. Left me his house in Richmond. I'm still sorting through his belongings. Richmond, Charles repeated, where Abigail was found. The three of them exchanged looks as the implications dawned simultaneously. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Owen, Abigail said slowly. What was your grandfather's full name? Richard Bradley, Owen replied, his face paling. Everyone called him Richie. Richard Bradley, R.B. The initials suddenly took on ominous significance. I think, Charles said quietly, we need to look into your grandfather's connection to Richmond, and potentially to Martha Foster. The three of them sat in Charles's study, the signet ring resting on the desk between them like a silent accusation. Owen stared at it, his face ashen. This has to be a coincidence, he said finally. My grandfather was many things. Difficult, private, sometimes harsh, but a kidnapper. It's unthinkable. Abigail reached for his hand. We don't know anything for certain yet. Charles watched their interaction with mixed emotions. The discovery of a potential link between Owen's grandfather and Emma's disappearance had created an impossible situation. Abigail's boyfriend potentially connected to her own kidnapping. Tell me about your grandfather, Charles said carefully. His occupation, his connection to Richmond. Owen ran a hand through his hair. He was a driver. Limousines, private cars for wealthy clients. He had contracts with several hotels and businesses in Boston. He paused. After my grandmother died, he relocated to Richmond. That would have been about 24 years ago. Shortly after Emma disappeared, Charles noted, trying to keep accusation from his voice. He never mentioned knowing Martha Foster, Owen continued. And I've known Abigail for 2 years. If he'd recognized her, wouldn't he have shown some reaction? Abigail's hand went reflexively to her necklace. Not if he wanted to keep the past buried. Charles tapped his fingers thoughtfully. Jenkins can look into Richard Bradley's financial records from that period, if he received a large payment around the time of the kidnapping. I need to see his house, Owen decided suddenly. If there's any evidence connecting him to what happened, it might be there. He was a pack rat, never threw anything away. Charles nodded. We can fly to Richmond tomorrow. I'll have Jenkins meet us there. Abigail stood abruptly. I need some air. She walked to the window, staring out at the manicured gardens where, 25 years ago, a child version of herself had played. This is a lot to process, Charles acknowledged. Finding out about your true identity, and now this connection to Owen's family. I can't imagine how overwhelming it must be. Abigail turned, her expression suddenly fierce. The worst part is that I've just lost Martha all over again. If she knew who I really was, if she took part in keeping me from my family, then everything between us was built on lies. Not everything, Charles said gently. She clearly loved you, raised you with care, but she stole my choice, Abigail replied, her voice breaking. My history, my true family. Owen moved to her side. We don't know exactly what happened yet, Abby. Maybe Martha thought she was protecting you. Abigail looked at him, conflict evident in her eyes. And what about your grandfather? What was his role in all this? The question hung in the air. Impossible to answer, but impossible to ignore. The next morning, the three boarded Charles's private jet to Richmond. The atmosphere was tense, each lost in their own thoughts. Halfway through the flight, Jenkins called with preliminary findings. Richard Bradley worked primarily for Carrington Hotels during the period in question, Charles relayed after hanging up. One of his regular clients was Robert Harding, Victoria's brother, Abigail asked. Charles nodded. Robert was legal counsel for Langford Textiles back then. He often used car services for business travel. Owen frowned. That doesn't prove anything. My grandfather drove dozens of executives. No, but it establishes a connection we didn't know existed, Charles responded. And there's more. 3 days after Emma disappeared, Richard Bradley deposited $50,000 in cash into an offshore account. Jenkins is still tracing where that money originated, Owen paled. That doesn't make sense. Grandpa never had that kind of money. He lived simply his entire life. Perhaps that was his payment, Charles suggested carefully, for delivering Emma to Martha Foster. Abigail's hand tightened around her armrest. Let's not jump to conclusions until we see the house. Richard Bradley's home sat on a quiet street in a middle-class Richmond neighborhood. A modest 2-story house with a neglected garden. Owen unlocked the door, leading them into spaces filled with decades of accumulated possessions. I've only been here a few times since he passed, Owen explained. Haven't had the heart to clear it out yet. They decided to split up. Owen taking the upstairs rooms, Charles the garage and basement, and Abigail the main floor living areas. The search was painstaking, with only the occasional call to share a finding. In the basement, Charles discovered old logging books where Richard had meticulously recorded his driving assignments, client names and payments. The entries from June 1997, the month Emma disappeared, had been torn out. Upstairs, Owen found a box of old photographs, including several of his grandfather with Robert Harding, that appeared to be more social than professional. His stomach knotted at the implications, but it was Abigail who made the most significant discovery. In the back of a hallway closet, behind stacked board games and old coats, she found a locked metal box. She brought it to the dining room where the others had gathered. "Can we open it?" she asked. Owen examined the lock. "I think I saw a set of keys in his bedroom drawer." The keys, when found, included a small one that fit the box. Inside, they discovered newspaper clippings about Emma's disappearance, a stack of letters between Richard and Martha Foster dating back to 1996, and, most damning of all, a pink hair ribbon that Charles recognized immediately. "Emma was wearing this the day she disappeared," he said quietly. It matched her dress. Owen read through the letters, his expression growing increasingly haunted. "They knew each other before the kidnapping," he said, his voice hollow. "It seems they were romantically involved at some point." Abigail picked up one of the letters, dated 2 weeks after her disappearance. Martha had written, "I cannot live with what we've done, Richard. The child asks for her father constantly, but Rar-E assures me no one will find her here, and that this is best for everyone. The money means nothing to me now." Rar-Ch, Charles repeated. "Robert Harding. It looks like Victoria's brother orchestrated the kidnapping," Abigail said slowly. "He hired Richard to take me from the party and deliver me to Martha." Owen set down the letters, unable to meet Abigail's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Abby. I had no idea my grandfather." He trailed off, words failing him. "This isn't your fault," she said, though her voice trembled. "But my flesh and blood helped steal you from your family," Owen replied bitterly. And now, he glanced down at Abigail's stomach, the implication clear. Their child would carry the blood of both victim and perpetrator. Charles watched them, seeing the weight of history threatening to crush the future. "Abigail is right, Owen. You aren't responsible for your grandfather's actions, just as Abigail isn't responsible for whatever Martha did." "But why?" Abigail asked, turning to Charles. "Why would Robert Harding orchestrate my kidnapping? What possible motive could he have?" Charles considered the question. "Robert was Victoria's brother. He became our family lawyer shortly after I married her. He helped draft changes to my will about a month before Emma disappeared." A cold realization washed over him. Changes that would have given Victoria control of significant assets if anything happened to Emma. "You think Victoria was behind it?" Abigail said, not a question but a statement. "Your own wife arranged to have your daughter taken." The accusation hung in the air. Terrible but increasingly plausible. "I need to confront her," Charles said grimly. "And Robert, with this evidence, we can finally get to the truth." Abigail stared at the pink ribbon, the physical proof of her stolen childhood. "I want to be there," she said firmly. "I deserve to hear them explain themselves." Owen looked at her, conflict evident in his expression. "Abby, we need to talk. About us. About..." He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. Her face softened momentarily. "I know, and we will. But first, I need answers." She turned to Charles. "When can we meet with Victoria and Robert?" "I'll arrange it as soon as we return to Boston," Charles promised. They won't slip away this time. The return flight to Boston passed in tense silence. Abigail leafed through the letters they'd found, piecing together the conspiracy that had stolen her childhood. Owen sat apart, staring out the window, the weight of his grandfather's betrayal evident in the slump of his shoulders. Charles arranged the confrontation for the following evening at his home, instructing Jenkins to ensure Victoria and Robert couldn't leave the city before then. Neither Abigail nor Owen returned to Newark. Instead, they stayed in Charles's guest rooms, each isolated in their own turmoil. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail wandered downstairs and found Owen in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water. "I was going to come find you," he said as she entered. "We need to talk." Abigail nodded, taking the seat across from him. In the dim light, his face appeared haggard with sleeplessness and guilt. "I've been thinking about what my grandfather did," Owen began. "About what it means for us." "It means nothing for us," Abigail replied firmly. "You aren't responsible for his actions." Owen shook his head. "It's not that simple. Our families are intertwined in the worst possible way. Your kidnapping, my grandfather's involvement." He hesitated. "And now the baby." Abigail's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I understand if you can't bear to be with me after all this. If the connection to my family is too painful." Abigail studied him. The man she'd planned to build a life with, suddenly transformed by revelations neither could have imagined. "I don't blame you for any of this," she said softly, "but I need time. Everything I thought I knew about my life has been upended. I can't make decisions about our future until I understand my past." Owen nodded, his expression bleak. "And I love you, Abby. That hasn't changed." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "I know, but love might not be enough right now." The next evening, Victoria arrived precisely at 7, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that matched her calculating eyes, if she was surprised to see Abigail seated beside Charles in the living room. She concealed it masterfully. "Charles, really?" she said with practiced exasperation. "I thought we'd moved past these dramatics." "Sit down, Victoria," Charles replied coldly. "Robert should be arriving momentarily." Victoria's composure faltered slightly at the mention of her brother. "What is this about? And why is she here?" She gestured dismissively toward Abigail. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," Abigail said, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. "After all, you've known who I am for 25 years. The doorbell rang, and Jenkins escorted Robert Harding into the room, at 65. Robert remained an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with Victoria's blue eyes and a practiced attorney's poker face. His confident stride faltered when he saw the gathering. "What's going on, Victoria?" he asked, ignoring Charles and Abigail completely. "Damage control, apparently," Victoria replied tightly. "Charles has been indulging in his Emma fantasies again." Charles opened a folder on the coffee table, spreading out the letters from Richard Bradley to Martha Foster. These were discovered yesterday in Richard Bradley's home in Richmond. They detail the arrangement between him, Martha Foster, and someone identified as R.A.H. to kidnap Emma Langford 25 years ago. Robert's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Richard Bradley was your regular driver at Carrington Hotels," Charles continued. "His grandson, coincidentally, is Abigail's partner." He fixed Robert with a hard stare. "You arranged for Emma to be taken from the garden party, handed off to Richard, who delivered her to Martha Foster in Richmond. For what? Money? Power? What was your price for stealing my daughter?" Victoria laughed, though the sound held no humor. "This is absurd. You've constructed an elaborate fantasy based on some old letters between people we barely knew." "We also have financial records," Charles countered. "A $50,000 cash deposit into Richard Bradley's offshore account 3 days after Emma disappeared. Bank records showing similar amounts withdrawn from your personal account, Robert. Robert glanced at Victoria, something unspoken passing between them. "You can't prove any of this is connected to Emma's disappearance," Robert said, his attorney's instincts kicking in. "It's all circumstantial." "The DNA isn't circumstantial," Charles replied. "Abigail is Emma. We have those test results, and with these letters, the financial records, and the testimony we can likely get from Martha Foster's associates in Richmond, we have enough to reopen the criminal investigation." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You fool!" she hissed at Robert. "I told you to destroy everything. I told you this would come back to haunt us." The admission hung in the air, damning in its implications. "Why?" Abigail asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Why take me from my father? What possible reason could justify that?" Victoria turned to her, years of practiced deception giving way to raw bitterness. "You want to know why? Because Charles worshipped the ground you walked on, his precious Emma, Diana's perfect legacy." Her voice twisted with hatred. "I was just the replacement wife, never good enough, never loved enough. And the final insult. His will left everything to you. The controlling interest in Langford textiles, the family properties, all of it. I would have received a pittance, even as his wife. So you decided to eliminate Emma from the equation," Charles said, the full horror of her betrayal washing over him. "You had my daughter kidnapped so you could control my fortune." "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Robert interjected, shooting Victoria a warning look. "The original plan was just to have her taken temporarily, to scare you into changing the will. Things escalated." "Escalated," Charles repeated incredulously. "You stole my child." "It was Victoria's idea," Robert said quickly. "She convinced me it was necessary, that you'd never truly commit to your new family with Emma in the picture." Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "Don't you dare throw me under the bus, Robert. This was a joint decision. You were the one who found Richard Bradley, who arranged everything with Martha Foster." As the siblings turned on each other, Abigail sat perfectly still, absorbing the callous discussion of her fate. These people had traded her life, her identity, her connection to her father, all for money and twisted jealousy. "I was 3 years old," she said finally, her voice cutting through their argument. "I was a child who lost everything. My home, my father, my very name, because of your greed and pettiness." Victoria regarded her coldly. "You were well cared for. Martha Foster was paid generously to raise you." "Paid," Abigail repeated. "My mother, Martha, received money to keep me. A monthly stipend," Robert confirmed, "delivered through intermediaries. She knew exactly who you were, where you came from. She agreed to raise you away from Boston, to never reveal your true identity." The revelation struck Abigail like a physical blow. Martha, the woman she'd loved, who she thought had loved her unconditionally, had been complicit in her kidnapping all along. "I was a transaction," she whispered. "Nothing but a business arrangement." Charles moved to her side, his face anguished. "Abigail, no. Martha may have made terrible choices, but from everything you've told me, she truly loved you." Owen, who had been silently watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "Did my grandfather know about all of this? Was he fully aware of what he was doing?" Robert nodded reluctantly. Richard understood the situation. He was well compensated for his cooperation and discretion. The confirmation of his grandfather's willing participation seemed to crush Owen. He stumbled back, bracing himself against the wall. "I've heard enough," Abigail said suddenly, rising. "I'm leaving." "Abigail, wait," Charles pleaded. "I can't be here right now," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone who should have protected me betrayed me instead. Everyone lied." She turned to Owen. "Everyone." Without another word, she walked out, ignoring Charles's calls. Owen hesitated, torn between following her and confronting his grandfather's legacy further. "Let her go," Charles told him quietly. "She needs space." As the door closed behind Abigail, Charles turned back to Victoria and Robert, his expression hardening. "Jenkins has already contacted the FBI. They'll be here shortly to take your statements. This time, you won't escape justice." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Justice? After 25 years? Good luck proving anything, Charles. It will be our word against yours." "And Abigail's," Charles replied. "And the evidence," And the DNA. He stood, towering over them. You took my daughter from me. You let me search for 25 years, knowing exactly where she was. There isn't a prison sentence long enough for what you've done. Outside in the garden where Emma had once played, Abigail stood alone in the gathering darkness, feeling more lost than she ever had before. 2 weeks passed. FBI agents interviewed everyone involved, collected evidence, and built their case against Victoria and Robert. Both had been released on substantial bail, their passports confiscated. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story about the Langford kidnapping case reopened, complete with grainy photos of Emma at 3 juxtaposed with Abigail's current image. Abigail had returned to Newark alone, ignoring calls from both Charles and Owen. She reopened her shop, mechanically altering wedding dresses and hemming pants while her mind reeled with the truth of her origins. Every night, she stared at the pink pearl necklace, unable to remove it, but equally unable to reconcile its meaning. The bell above her shop door jingled. Abigail looked up, preparing her professional smile, only to find herself facing Martha Foster's oldest friend, Ruth Carter. "I thought you might need company," Ruth said, her lined face gentle with concern. "The newspapers made it all the way to Richmond." Abigail set down her sewing. "Did you know about who I really was?" Ruth shook her head, settling into a chair by the counter. "Martha never told me specifics, just that there were complications around your adoption. I suspected it wasn't entirely legal, but," she sighed, "times were different. Unofficial adoptions happened, especially in poorer communities." "It wasn't an adoption," Abigail said flatly. "It was a kidnapping. I was stolen from my father for money." Ruth nodded sadly. "I gathered that from the news. I can't defend what Martha did, but I knew her for 40 years. Abigail, whatever her initial motivations, that woman loved you more than life itself." Abigail turned away, blinking back tears. "She lied to me my entire life." "Yes," Ruth acknowledged, "and she regretted it. Those last months, when the cancer was bad. She talked about making things right, but she was afraid of losing you, afraid of legal consequences." "Did she leave anything? Any explanation?" Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. "She gave me this before she passed. Said if you ever discovered the truth about your past, I should give it to you." Abigail took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing Martha's neat handwriting. After Ruth left, she sat alone in the shop, the letter burning in her hands. Finally, as evening shadows lengthened, she tore it open. "My dearest Abigail, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth I was too cowardly to tell you in life. I won't ask for forgiveness I don't deserve. What I did was unforgivable, regardless of the justifications I made to myself. The full truth. Richard Bradley approached me about taking in a child whose wealthy family didn't want her. He offered money, which I needed desperately after losing my job. I told myself I was rescuing you, giving you a better life than with people who would give away their own child. It wasn't until I saw the news reports about your disappearance that I realized the terrible truth. By then, I had fallen completely in love with you. Selfishly, I convinced myself that returning you would only traumatize you further. Each month, money arrived from Richard, and each month, my shame grew alongside my love for you, the woman you knew, the mother who taught you to sew, who read to you every night, who celebrated every achievement. That woman was real. My love for you was the most genuine thing in my life. I've left something for you in the old sewing cabinet, bottom drawer, behind the pattern books. It belongs to your father, with eternal love and eternal regret." Martha, tears streamed down Abigail's face as she set the letter aside, moving to the antique sewing cabinet. She pulled out the pattern books from the bottom drawer and reached behind them. Her fingers found a small object wrapped in faded tissue paper. Inside was Emma's lost slipper, the match to the one Charles had kept all these years. Martha had preserved it perfectly, the tiny embroidered roses still vibrant along its edges. Abigail clutched the slipper to her chest, finally allowing herself to sob, for the mother who had loved her through deception, for the father who had searched relentlessly, for the child she had been, and for the baby growing inside her who would inherit this complicated legacy. When the tears subsided, she reached for her phone. Charles arrived the next morning, his face lined with worry. "Thank you for calling," he said, as Abigail led him into the apartment above her shop. She nodded, leading him to the kitchen table where the letter and slipper lay. "I thought you should see these." As Charles read Martha's confession, his expression shifted from anger to a complex understanding. When he reached for the slipper with trembling hands, tears filled his eyes. "Diana embroidered these roses before you were born," he whispered. "She was certain we would have a daughter." Abigail sat across from him. "I've been thinking about what Martha wrote, about her shame growing alongside her love for me, about convincing herself she was doing the right thing." She paused. "It doesn't excuse what she did, but I understand how someone could make terrible choices from a place of love, however misguided." Charles looked up from the slipper. "Are you saying you forgive her?" "I'm trying to," Abigail admitted. "Not for her sake, but for mine, and for my babies." She placed a hand on her slightly rounded belly. "I don't want to carry anger into this new life I'm creating." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "It's taken me 25 years to find you. I don't want to waste another day on bitterness toward Martha Foster, regardless of her role in this." "And Victoria?" Abigail asked. "Robert, can you forgive them too?" Charles's expression hardened. "That's more difficult. Their actions weren't motivated by misguided love, but by greed and jealousy." "I understand," Abigail said softly. "I haven't reached that point yet either." She hesitated. "Have you heard from Owen?" "No," Charles replied. "Jenkins says he's been staying at a hotel, not at Richard's house or your apartment." Abigail nodded, a new sadness crossing her features. "I haven't returned his calls. I needed space to process everything, but now," she sighed, "now I realize I'm punishing him for sins he never committed." "He loves you," Charles observed. "That much is obvious." "I love him too," Abigail admitted. "But our family's history complicates everything. His grandfather helped steal me from you. Our child will carry that legacy." Charles reached across the table, tentatively taking her hand. "Family isn't just blood and history, Abigail. It's also choice. Every day, we choose who we want to be to each other." Abigail squeezed his hand, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "I need to see Owen, to talk about our future, whatever it might be." "And what about us?" Charles asked softly. "I don't expect you to suddenly think of me as your father, but I hope we can build something new together." Abigail considered this man who had searched for her relentlessly, who had recognized her from a necklace and never given up hope. "I'd like that," she said finally, "one day at a time." As Charles prepared to leave, Abigail handed him the slipper. "This belongs with its pair. They should be together again." Charles accepted it reverently. "Like us," he said quietly. After he left, Abigail dialed Owen's number when his voice answered, tentative and hopeful. She took a deep breath. "We need to talk," she said. "Not about our grandparents or our parents. About us and our baby, and the future we choose to build." That evening, Owen sat across from Abigail at a small cafe, his eyes never leaving her face. "I understand if you can't forgive what my grandfather did," he began. Abigail shook her head. "I'm learning that forgiveness isn't about excusing the past. It's about refusing to let it poison the future." She placed her hand over his. "I don't blame you for Richard's actions, Owen. Just as I hope our child won't be blamed for any of this tangled history." Relief washed over Owen's face. "I was so afraid I'd lost you. We've all lost enough," Abigail said firmly. "I'm choosing to break that cycle. I'm choosing forgiveness. Not forgetting, but forgiveness. For Martha, for Charles, for myself." She met his gaze steadily. "And I choose you, if you'll still have me." Owen's eyes filled with tears as he squeezed her hand. Always, as they sat together, planning their imperfect but hopeful future, Abigail felt the weight of her dual identity, Abigail Foster and Emma Langford, beginning to settle into something integrated and whole. The pink pearl necklace rested against her skin, no longer a mystery but a bridge between her past and future. She was choosing forgiveness, not because those who had wronged her deserved it, but because she deserved peace. 6 months later, Boston experienced one of those perfect autumn days that New England is famous for. Crisp air, golden light, and trees ablaze with red and orange in a modest colonial house just outside the city. Far from the Beacon Hill mansion where Emma had disappeared, Charles Langford arranged flowers in a nursery painted in soft yellows and greens, The trial of Victoria and Robert had concluded 2 months earlier, with overwhelming evidence against them. Both had accepted plea deals to avoid longer sentences. Victoria received 8 years for conspiracy to kidnap. Robert, as the primary orchestrator, received 12. The courtroom had been packed with reporters on the day of sentencing, all eager to document the conclusion of what had become known as the Pink Pearl Mystery. Charles heard the front door open and close downstairs. "Up here," he called. Abigail appeared in the doorway, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. "The flowers look beautiful," she said, admiring the arrangement of white lilies and yellow roses. "Diana loved lilies," Charles replied. "I thought they'd be nice for the baby's room." The transition hadn't been seamless. Abigail still called him Charles, not Dad, though the formal Mr. Langford had long since disappeared. She maintained her identity as Abigail rather than Emma, explaining that Emma belonged to a life she couldn't remember, but they were building something meaningful, a relationship defined by shared present rather than stolen past. "Owen's bringing dinner," Abigail said, lowering herself carefully into the rocking chair. "He's convinced the baby's coming tonight, though Dr. Phillips says we have at least another week." Charles smiled. First-time fathers are always anxious, after the revelations about their family's intertwined past. Abigail and Owen had briefly separated to process everything independently. Their reunion came with a commitment to build a future unburdened by their grandparents' sins. 3 months ago, they had married in a simple ceremony at the workshop where Charles had first recognized the pink pearl necklace, a deliberate choice to transform a place of discovery into one of new beginnings. The doorbell rang, and Charles went to help Owen with the takeout bags from their favorite Italian restaurant. "Everything's ready upstairs," Charles told him. "Crib assembled, monitors installed, more stuffed animals than any one baby could possibly need." Owen laughed, the easy rapport between them a hard-won victory after months of awkwardness. "I added another bear this morning while Abby was at her doctor's appointment. Don't tell her. She thinks we have too many already." As they set up dinner in the kitchen, Abigail joined them, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "Have you settled on a name yet?" Charles asked, passing her a plate. Owen and Abigail exchanged a look. "We have," Abigail said. "If it's a girl, Diana Martha. If it's a boy, Daniel Matthew." Charles stilled, emotion washing over his face. "Diana, your mother's name?" Abigail nodded. "And Martha, who loved me in her imperfect way. Both women are part of who I am. They would be honored," Charles said softly. As they ate, the conversation turned to Charles's recent decision that had surprised Boston's business community, but made perfect sense to those who knew him well. "The board wasn't happy," he admitted, "but they've accepted my terms. Langford Textiles will transition to employee ownership over the next 5 years. The bulk of my personal assets will fund the new foundation." Following Victoria's conviction, Charles had announced his retirement from active management of Langford Textiles and the establishment of the Emma Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting missing children's organizations and providing resources for families reunited after long separations. "The foundation office looks great," Owen commented. "The renovations are almost complete." Charles nodded appreciatively. Owen had taken a leave of absence from teaching to help establish the foundation, his mathematics background proving invaluable for program assessment and resource allocation. "I never thought I'd walk away from the company," Charles reflected. "For decades, it was all I had besides the search for Emma." He smiled at Abigail. "Now it seems utterly unimportant compared to this, to family." After dinner, Abigail excused herself to rest while Owen and Charles cleaned up as they worked side by side. Charles observed Owen's distracted expression. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Owen hesitated. "I visited my grandfather last week, in prison." Charles set down the plate he was drying. Richard Bradley had received a 5-year sentence for his role in the kidnapping, reduced due to his cooperation with prosecutors. "How was that?" "Hard," Owen admitted. "He's old now, frail, kept saying he was sorry, that he never meant for things to go so far." He shook his head. "The thing is, I believe him. Not that it excuses what he did, but I think he genuinely regrets his part in all this." Charles considered this. "Regret doesn't undo damage, but it's a starting point for healing." "That's what Abby said," Owen replied. "She's taught me a lot about forgiveness." "She's taught us all," Charles agreed. Later that evening, as Owen and Abigail prepared to leave, Abigail suddenly gripped the back of a chair, her face contorting. "Abby," Owen was instantly at her side. "I think," she said through gritted teeth, "Dr. Phillips was wrong about that week." The next hours passed in a blur of hospital lights, medical staff, and Abigail's determined focus. Charles waited in the family room, fingers absently tracing the inscription on the pink pearl necklace Abigail had asked him to hold for safekeeping. To my little star, now a new star was arriving, connecting past to future in ways he'd never imagined possible. Just after midnight, Owen appeared, his face alight with wonder and exhaustion. "Diana," he said simply. "Diana Martha Bradley, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, perfect in every way." Charles embraced him, his heart too full for words. When he finally entered Abigail's room, the sight before him took his breath away. Abigail cradling her newborn daughter, the same gentle curve of cheek that Diana had passed to Emma now visible in the tiny face of their granddaughter. "Would you like to hold her?" Abigail asked softly. As Charles took the small bundle, memories of holding Emma, of holding Abigail, for the first time washed over him. "Hello, little star," he whispered. "I've been thinking," Abigail said, watching them together, "about names and identity and what we call each other." Charles looked up, questioning. "I'm still Abigail," she continued. "That won't change, but I've realized that being Abigail doesn't mean I can't also be your daughter." She smiled tentatively. "If you'd like, I thought I might start calling you Dad." The simplicity of the offer, this gift he'd dreamed of for 25 years, brought tears to Charles's eyes. "I'd like that very much." Baby Diana shifted in his arms, her tiny hand curling around his finger with surprising strength. 3 days later, they brought Diana home to the yellow and green nursery. As Abigail settled into the rocking chair to feed her daughter, she noticed Charles standing by the window, watching the sunset. "Everything okay, Dad?" The word still felt new on her tongue, but increasingly right. Charles turned, his expression peaceful. "Just thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed in a year." Owen entered carrying tea for Abigail. "From strangers to family," he observed, setting the mug beside her. "Family," Charles repeated thoughtfully. "You know, all those years searching for Emma, I thought finding her would restore what was taken. I never imagined it would create something entirely new instead." Abigail smiled down at her daughter. "That's what I'm counting on with Diana. Not remaking the past, but creating a better future." She touched the pink pearl necklace, now hanging from a small display frame on the nursery wall, preserved as a testament to their journey, but no longer needed as a reminder. "She'll know the whole story someday," Abigail continued, "the good and the bad. But she'll also know that her family chose forgiveness over bitterness, love over resentment." As twilight deepened outside, the 4 of them remained together in the warm glow of the nursery lamp. Charles watched his daughter, her husband, and his granddaughter, this new family woven from broken threads of the past. What had been lost could never be recovered exactly as it was, but what they had built in its place was perhaps even more precious for having been chosen rather than merely inherited. Outside, the first star appeared in the evening sky, a fitting sentinel for new beginnings and healed hearts.